Welcome. To demonstrate some of the features of the application, let's pretend we have a marketing campaign and we're tasked with determining its impact on sales. Before jumping to the statistics, we have to organize and structure the various data sources. In this case, we have four. Unit sales over time for product A. Similar unit sales for all the competition, we'll call it product C. And we have a target list with when the customer was reached. Here, one of the challenges is going to be is that we have a good number of nulls because we were not able to reach all the customers on the target list. And so we'll have to consider that as we organize the data. Finally, a record of the type of digital engagement over time. And the challenge with this data source is it's been provided to us in what some people call a wide format or a time series, and we'll have to process it accordingly. We'll be covering a lot of ground, so let's briefly go over the plan. We're going to create links to our files. The first one will be for product A, competition, a wide format, engagement over time, and our target list. From each source, I'll extract the information required for the analysis. I won't need everything. Some fields will describe the subject, others a measurement over time. As is often the case, the fields that describe the subject are often repeated and need to be deduped, while maintaining the full record of the measurement hosted in the same file. Here I'm going to take two fields that describe the subject in addition to the unit counts. In this next file, we've got the series. We're going to have to conduct a pivot and then extract the information that's hosted in the field name into two separate fields. For the target list, we'll interpret what it means to be, of course, part of the list, but then also excluded from the list, in addition to other qualities that describe the subject. With the fields now mapped to a quality or measurement, I'll go ahead and combine them. The fields that encode the same information will be stacked. Finally, I'll build what I need for the statistical analysis, where there is a single record for each subject, and the information about that subject is complete and consistent regardless of how they combine and from where they were ultimately sourced. In the next 15 minutes, we'll have structured this data, computed a few derived fields, all in such a way that we've created a complete end-to-end documented automated workflow. Something I was never able to accomplish using SQL, Python, SAS, you name it, and certainly not within even a week's worth of effort. The first thing that I'm going to do is collect the various data sources required for the statistical analysis. To do so, I'll select each file on the left to be included accordingly. The platform performs an analysis of the individual data sources in order to inform a series of next steps. It does so in context of the individual data sources, as well as how each data source work together. The system is multi-threaded, so as I select the files, it's busy performing an analysis of each data source while I continue with the task at hand. Okay, now that I'm done with selecting the data sources, let's take a look at the next steps. The first thing I'm going to tackle is to configure the date field to let the system know how to convert the string values into a valid date. The system updates a set of instructions for me after every new entry from me. If it's not already clear, each card on the right is a view of a single data source. Here I can quickly determine which fields are of interest and hide those that aren't. In this second data source, we also have a date field that needs to be configured. Notice how the instant the system learns how to interpret the date fields, it reports back to me the length and start date of that time series. In the event there is a missing time period, it reports the gaps accordingly. Nice. On to the next data source. The data in this file encodes the customer engagement in a digital campaign over time. The challenge here is that the information is presented across a series of measurements. That means the measurement values are hosted across multiple fields. Furthermore, the information that describes the measurement is encoded in the field names and not the field values. I need to change that. Of course, guided by the feedback from the system. To do so, I'm going to create a new measurement from the series of values. I'll call that measurement engagement. Next, as I look at the field names, I can see that there are two factors encoded in the field name. There's the date, 2014, 05, 04, etc. And there's the additional factor of engagement type, send, open, and click. Next, I need to interpret what each field name means for each of the factors. Given the consistent naming schema here of the field names, instead of doing so manually, I'm going to use a regular expression engine that is part of the system to extract that information for me. Nice. What's next? The system has figured out that I created a new date field and needs me to configure it accordingly. With the wide file configuration now out of the way, let's move on to the next file, the target list. This file has a bit of a hodgepodge of fields. While I appreciate having the option to use the information, right now I'm going to ignore many of them to focus on what I care most about for purposes of the analysis. This updated view of the data is much easier for me to focus on what I need. I'm going to set the reach date as a date field. The system immediately recognized there must be an implied measurement here. I'm going to name that reach activity. As I continue to follow the step-by-step instructions generated by the system, I would like to point out how the platform generates a summary report that I can use to validate or confirm the content of each field. Of course, based on the field type. We've seen how the date field reports a frequency count, but once configured, a time series. For fields that describe a subject quality and those that describe the components of a measurement, it generates a frequency count. For a measurement, it generates a statistical summary. And finally, for the subject field, a report of the number of fields that would be excluded in the event there are missing subject values. With the source-specific steps now out of the way, there's just one last step. The subject field in each of the data sources needs to be named similarly. The system has come up with a solution for me that I'll go ahead and use to save me just that much more time. That was easy. I have my 4 files all set up with a permanent link to where they were sourced and an inventory of the fields that I need from each of these sources, no matter in which format they were presented to me. With that, let's move on to the next step. In this phase of the workflow, we're going to shift gears. I'm going to move away from thinking about fields and data sources per se, to instead identify fields that might host the same information regardless of where they were sourced, or even for that matter, named. To level set, we have our subject field. It is the only field that is guaranteed to come from all of the data sources. The other fields, on the other hand, may or may not be sourced from multiple places. All right, to start, we have the field specialty descending. We also have the field specialty. They seem like candidates that host the same information. However, upon further inspection, one is clearly different than the other. Which reminds me, I was told the specialty information in the target list was unreliable. So I'm going to ignore the information sourced from the target list, but only for that field, of course. I have these 2 fields that seem to describe the customer state. Based on the contents of each, they clearly encode the same information and in the same way. Instead of worrying about which field to choose, I'm going to include both by giving them the same name and configuring how to determine the source of truth based on the reliability of each source. I'll repeat the process for the 2 fields that host the zip code information. The workflow anticipates the fact that as I learn more about the data, I might want to change my mind along the way. A field that seemed to be of value earlier on in the process is something I've determined is no longer required, and thus something I'll go ahead and remove. Whether or not a subject is in-network is specified in the target list. The system has identified, however, that I need to specify how to interpret this information for the subjects not described one way or another, those subjects not included in the target list data. I'll provide that information here. Great catch. Let's see what I have in the unit count measurement. I have the measurement itself, unit count, a date field, and a payment type group. I can't say I like the name of these fields. I'll update those soon enough. But in the meantime, If I look at the unit count data sources, I can see information that is encoded in the file name that describes something important about the measurement, the product. I'm going to capture this group by file information by creating a new component for the unit count measurement. I'll name this field unit product. Any record from the product A CSV, I'll give it the value of product A. And any record from the product comp CSV file, I'll give it a value of product C. Great. I've added a new component to the unit count measurement that describes the product for each of the values in the measurement. If I look at the frequency count, I can see that I have 50,000 records with a value of product A and 1.2 million records for the competition. That makes sense. Cool. While I complete the remaining tasks, including renaming some of the fields and other tasks prompted by the system, let's review what I've accomplished thus far. Whereas when I started this process, I had about 50 different fields from 4 different sources, I've reduced what I need to focus on to 7, 4 qualities and 3 measurements. I'm also confident that the information will come together in a way that is a complete record of the information encoded explicitly or otherwise implied by the data. In the event I have a question about how I treated a given data source, I can easily review and update accordingly. Any subsequent analysis will also be updated. With that, let's move on to the next step. It's here in the workbench area that I will specify the data I want for my statistical analysis. So instead of thinking about inputs as I have up to this point, I'm now thinking outputs. On the left, I have my now familiar units of information, that's 4 qualities and 3 measurements. I'm going to select what I want in the analysis using the representation of the data on the left. I can combine these units to generate any number of derived fields. Let's start by pulling the unit counts. As we saw before, I can see the related fields for this measurement. There are the 2 components, product and payer. I also have the date field. The first thing I want to include in the analysis is a time series of the unit counts. Let's pick the first 3 months starting on the 11th month of 2014. I'm next going to specify my subject universe in addition to the factors for the statistical analysis. I'll include the subject specialty and the subject state. I'll limit the subject universe to those not living in Illinois. Sorry, Illinois. Another important predicting factor is the value of each subject based on the units they each generate. To do that, I'm going to perform a decile analysis. In fact, I'd like to repeat that analysis for each of product A and product C. There's a lot more we can do here, but for the purposes of this demonstration, let's see what we've got. And here's the data for our statistical analysis. The number of subjects is based on all subjects not living in Illinois. We have the 2 qualities, specialty and state. We also have the time series, 3 months. In the last 2 fields, we have the series of decile analyses, 1 for each of the products, A and C. The 2 fields before that are those used to compute the decile. Fantastic. I'm going to go ahead and export that data, and I'm good to go. We have a permanent end-to-end record, essentially a configuration for how to structure and complete a complex series of analyses, start to finish. It captures the best of both worlds, both reproducible and extendable. We can add new data, tweak our methodology with ease, efficiency, and confidence. And we did it faster than I have ever managed to using SQL, SAS, and the like, or Python. I hope that you have enjoyed this presentation. To learn more about how Lucivia's data structuring and analytics platform might work for you, be sure to visit our website, subscribe to our newsletter, or email us directly. We'd love to hear from you.